Hi, Dirk. It's great to have you with us. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. And I also want to thank you actually for the invite to have a discussion with you. So yeah, things are going well. I hope the same at your end.
Same here as well. Busy in the PFAS world. So, really great that you could join us today. And for
Mm-hmm.
listeners, giving a bit of context, you spent more than 25 years in environmental consulting, working with major organizations around the world. And in recent years, a big part of that work has been helping companies figure out how to deal with PFAS. And that's exactly what I'm excited to dive into today.
Hmm. That's correct indeed. I've done quite a lot of projects, but the most challenging ones are the most recent ones. And I think, PFAS, is quite challenging. So keen to
Yeah.
share my insights and, have a discussion with you on this topic.
Great. So diving right into it, starting from just how we can think about the right treatment or remediation system trains, for instance, right? So we work with industries all over the world that are now confronting the PFAS challenges, whether it's about the need to reduce the emissions or to
Mhm.
also remediate the already caused contamination, the legacy contamination. So when you enter a PFAS project, what are the key questions you ask to frame the solution in the right pathway?
Yeah, there's of course multiple questions that need to be answered. But I think you need to start really from having a good detailed picture. I mean, having an understanding on, what is the pollution, what type of PFAS do we have, how do they migrate in the environment, who is at risk. So really understanding, the site conceptual model, but also understanding, where you need to go from a regulatory perspective, but also from a
Mhm.
client perspective. You've got clients that are more into responding to regulatory compliance. They are more in a reactive mode, but you also have clients that are more in a proactive mode and they're actually anticipating and wanting to reduce their emissions already. So it's a different, type of approach. But that sets a little bit the framework, and in general, it means that you need to work both on the technical, practical side, and then work out in a solution that fits actually the purpose of the demand. Yeah.
I mean, there's actually a great way into the next question I had, which is that
Hmm.
industrial clients often they have to juggle between so many different parameters. It's the cost, it's the timeline for implementation, but
Right.
also operation realities of what's actually possible, and not just the technical performance. So, what are the most significant trade-offs that you usually see, and how do you help clients navigate them responsibly?
Oh, that's a really great question. I have to say that's something we're facing, and I guess you are facing the same question every day. Yeah, I mean, it's a and when we look at the water side, I think let's discuss water. I think one of the biggest trade-offs we see with clients is actually what levels do we need to achieve? What's the complexity of the problem we need to solve? Because there's a difference between, reducing from 1,000 nanograms to, let's say, 100 nanograms. That is, relatively straightforward. But, we are both working on the lower end, so getting from 100 to 10 or even lower and even non-detect
Mhm.
sometimes that is quite more challenging from a technical perspective. It's also more
Mhm.
expensive. And
Yeah.
then if we take into account and even, the ultra short PFAS, they also come into the game now. That's even more challenging. So
Yeah.
I think really that's something we're seeing is the trade-off on, what do we need to achieve from a compliance perspective because things are evolving. We are in a sort of evolutive type of context. There's new toxicity data coming out on specific PFAS. There's new regulations on specific PFAS. The levels go down and all that. So you also need to anticipate when you're building your solution so that you can actually work towards changes in the future. So meaning that a one size fits all is probably not the solution. You need to go for hybrid and flexible type of modeler, maybe type of solutions and actually, work towards changes if needed when there's new insights in science, when there's new insights on, toxicity or new technologies like technology Oxyle is looking into that become available. So
Mhm.
I think that's an important one.
Yeah, that's a great framing there, right? So we often
Hmm.
hear that there's one solution that can solve the PFAS problem.
Hmm.
What we know in reality is there's no single bullet. and you need to look for the most cost-effective
Hmm.
or more economical, but also practical solution, which sometimes could be a hybrid system, which needs to
Correct.
complement each other, right? And that's obviously, which makes it a more complex problem to solve with new stakeholders, but also maybe a more implementable solution in the end, then, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And these are some of these are like, short-term success criteria here of
Hmm.
performance and cost, for example. So
Hmm.
I'm curious about, so what would success look like in a very well-designed PFAS management program in the short term, let's say in a year's context, versus a long-term success like in 5 years? So could you help us map that out?
Yeah, I think, short term, let's say year one, the success is really getting about control of the situation. So really understanding the problem that you have, understanding the risks, and putting in place, if needed, already measures to protect the people and environment. It could be an interim treatment system or containment system, but actually already address the risks that are, top priority. When you then look into year five, success would be different, I would say. You've moved away from what I would call reactive to more proactive, and
Mm-hmm.
you have a more robust plan. You have a remedial plan, approved with authorities, you have a treatment system in place, and you're seeing already measurable reductions in PFAS concentrations. You've built trust with the regulators because you're performing, and you also build trust with the community. So that is important. And as I already mentioned, you also need to adapt. I mean, it's what you propose initially will change in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, things evolve. And it's possible, and we see that already with clients, that they are pilot testing new technologies so that you have to update your remedial strategy, maybe your treatment train. And so be flexible, I think, is important. And for me, it's not predictable. It is a journey. It's sustained progress, and it's not about a quick fix. It's really a journey, I would say.
Yeah, with new data coming in, new insights from
Hmm.
toxicity, from regulations, but also, I guess, from treatments,
Hmm.
flexibility, adaptability will be part of the long-term success.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for
No,
sure.
great insights on that. So thank you for that. And
Hmm.
it's I'm very mindful as well. A challenge as big as the PFAS challenge around waste
Hmm.
management requires more than just one stakeholder. It really requires coordination of multiple stakeholders in the ecosystem. And what kind of stakeholders would you say their involvement is critical to building an effective PFAS treatment or remediation strategy? And who needs to be at the table early for this to work well?
Well, I think, experience, both you and I think we've seen that stakeholder is probably, the stakeholder challenge is probably the most important one.
Yeah.
For me, PFAS is not a technical issue. It is a technical issue, but we can
Yeah.
solve it. But it's actually, getting a solution in front of the stakeholders and then getting it, societal acceptance, I call it like that.
Hmm.
Now, when you look into the stakeholders, of course, the regulators, they play a quite important role. I mean, you need to align with them on expectations, and so that in the future you can avoid surprises. I think
Yeah.
that's a really critical one. But even more, I think it's community. Community is there. You need to build trust with them. You need to bring them to the table quite early, I have to say, and you need to understand the local concerns.
Hmm.
And something that is also often forgotten is internal alignment. I mean, you also within the company, you need also alignment from operations to legal to the leadership, so that everybody, all the stakeholders are pulling in the same direction so that there's no contradiction. And so we've seen actually project break up because stakeholders are brought in too late.
Uh-huh.
And when you bring in them, and on the flip side, I mean, it's the other way around because when you engage early, you get better outcomes. You get smoother permitting, you get no appeals against a permit that is submitted, and fewer delays. So for me, it's working with the stakeholders. It's more about co-designing a solution than just
Hmm.
presenting it and say, this is the solution, accept
Yeah.
it. So it's really for me, co-creation, co-design.
Yeah. I mean, great point around the breakdown of these
Hmm.
projects, right? So many stakeholders, so many sometimes conflicting
Hmm.
indications as well. So,
Yeah.
what would you say are the biggest criteria that distinguishes a company who's doing PFAS management well from the ones who are not executing it's the right way? One thing you already mentioned was to, be well aligned early on. What else do you think they distinguish the successful outcomes?
Well, yeah, again, that's a really important question, and it's something we face in our projects. I mean, when projects tend to break down, it's only in a few key areas. So I think
Mm,
one is, the poor site characterization. So you do not understand your problem, the site conception model, and when you propose a solution, the solution won't held up. I mean, it's
mm,
not the right solution. So that's a critical one. The other one is also you're too rigid in your thinking. You choose a technology too early,
mm,
sometimes even without testing, and then you realize while running that it's not performing to what your expectations and regulations are, which is of course credibility issue. And finally, we underestimate most of the time the importance of stakeholder engagement because
mhm.
if you don't get approval, we just discussed it, but if you don't have approval from the stakeholders, you can propose anything, but it's not going to fly. So
Yeah.
for me, organizations that execute well are the ones that invest in upfront science. They pilot test their solutions. They are
Mhm,
flexible. They remain flexible also, but also communicate very transparently. So they treat PFAS as a long-term issue, but not as a one-off project.
mhm.
They build more internal ownership and external trust. And for me, that's what makes the difference into success or failure.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, that's great insights from you on that. You mentioned a couple of times the importance of all kinds of stakeholders to come to the table and community being one of them. For
Mhm.
my curiosity, so when we refer to community in this case as a stakeholder, are these for you like the people living around that site which has remediation issues, or are we talking a bit broader than that as well?
It could be quite diverse, I have to say. We've
Uh-huh.
seen projects where we are facing people living, families, children, but also farmers, for example, that
Okay.
are growing vegetable crops or
Mm-hmm.
cattle in an area.
Mm-hmm.
You could also have drinking water companies that are exposed, for example. It could be very diverse, and so that makes it also challenging because you could find yourself with multiple different
Yeah.
stakeholders with all different type of priorities and questions.
Yeah.
And you need to find a solution that actually fits, everybody. So
Yeah.
that's why, the co-design, but also the working together in full transparency and the proactive approach is probably the best
Yeah.
suggestion we can make to have a successful outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't agree more with you. Co-designing for solving
Yep.
PFAS challenges.
Yeah.
Such a great insight on that.
Uh-huh.
Um, what breakthroughs or shifts in the technical or policy or even the behavioral mindsets do you think would make the biggest difference in tackling PFAS pollution over the next 10 years?
I think you're in the middle of it, to be honest. Technically for me, it's actually moving away from what I would call capture to destruction, and this including the ultra short PFAS. Right now we're mostly concentrating PFAS in filters,
Mhm,
resins, or in waste streams, and I really believe, that destruction is the way to go. We see that technologies like electrochemical oxidation,
mhm,
SCO, supercritical water oxidation, for example, or plasma, are showing promising results for
yeah,
PFAS breakdown. And once those are scalable and cost
yeah,
effective, for me, it will be a massive game changer. So
mhm,
technically, I think we see a lot of things rapidly evolving, which is a great thing. On the policy side, we also see a shift. Now we see a shift where PFAS is now more regulated as a class than as an individual compound. And I think that is also critical. It
mhm,
closes loopholes and it drives innovation. And innovation is just what we need actually to solve the PFAS conundrum. And then the last one for me is behavioral.
mhm,
We see that companies are now voluntarily looking into phasing out PFAS, which is great from,
mhm,
for example, from consumer products, or even changing AFFF into fluorine-free
yeah,
firefighting foams. For me, that's really encouraging. That means that we're reducing at source, and the more we reduce at source, the less we will have to clean up in the future. So
yeah.
that's for me an important takeaway also.
Yeah, great behavioral mindset shift,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Reduce
yeah,
what you can reduce as emissions if you
yeah,
can by avoiding them in
mhm,
the first place, and then try to
yeah,
treat better with new treatments
mhm,
and set the right regulations around that. So really a lot of
mhm,
comprehensive solution-oriented mindset shifts, basically, right?
yeah, yeah.
And uh, what advice would you give to someone who's beginning their PFAS management journey today with 25 years of experience?
All right. My advice. the problem is not going to go away. So
Mm.
for me, it's here to stay and it needs to be resolved. So don't wait, start now. I think it's quite crucial to address the issue. At least start mapping your PFAS footprint.
Mhm.
If needed already, start engaging with your stakeholders and build a game plan. A game plan that is flexible, forward-looking. For me, PFAS is an enterprise business risk that needs to be addressed by industry. And we see companies actually going for that proactive approach.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's clear you will not have the answers on day one for sure. You will have, it's a journey as we said, huh? But I think it's best that you get started in the journey instead of waiting until being asked to start your journey and then being in a reactive mode.
Yeah, no, I love that mindset as well. Be proactive
Hmm.
and don't wait
Hmm.
for someone to tell you to act.
Yeah.
Um, what keeps you hopeful that at some point in the future we will actually solve and reduce the PFAS emissions?
I think we're both very hopeful in the
Mhm.
sense that, I see a lot of momentum in the market. There's a lot of things moving. We see regulators stepping up, which is good. We see industry innovating, and we see communities that are far more engaged on the topic.
Yeah.
And that's really positive, I would say. What we also see is the first results. I think you've seen results on PFAS in human blood. We see these concentrations dropping in US, in Europe, which is a great thing because we've been working on exposure and emissions, and we see the result already, on the human blood, which is an extremely positive sign. The other thing is, the industry that is shifting away from PFAS where they can. I mean, it's not always possible, but where they can, I already mentioned, the firefighting foams,
Yeah.
or even, working towards products that are not containing any PFAS, which
Mhm.
also is great. So for me, it really shows that the problem is solvable. It's not going to be easy for sure. I mean, but I think with the right partnerships and persistence, endurance, I'm strongly convinced, and I think like you also, Fajer, that we can definitely turn the tide on the PFAS problem.
Absolutely. I think it's like a willpower problem, isn't it?
Mm,
Like if we have a
mm,
collective willpower from all stakeholders that you mentioned need to be on the table, this is solvable problem. As you said, it's not
mm-hmm,
necessarily a technical problem. It's more
mm-hmm,
like an implementation and willpower problem of
yeah,
being proactive and knowing it's possible to solve, so let's get to it.
mm-hmm.
On that really positive, optimistic note, I would like to thank you so much, Dirk, for
No, pleasure.
enjoying today's conversation and showing so much light into this process of what goes behind the scenes of managing PFAS, the effective way for a more scalable and lasting impact in a positive manner. Thank you. I learned a lot, and I'm sure anyone listening also did. And I hope to be able to chat with you again about PFAS in the
Okay.
future.
With pleasure, Fayer, and all the success in your endeavors with the Oxile.
Thank you, Dirk.
Bye.